An hour before the meeting, Michael stood barefoot on the cold tile of his Encino kitchen, clutching a cup of iced tea he couldn't bring himself to drink. Outside, the night was so silent that even the refrigerator's hum sounded intrusive. 3 times he'd lifted his phone to call his manager, cancel everything, forget this ever happened. But each time he hesitated. $5 million for one private meeting. No cameras, no press, no audience. She doesn't want anything, his lawyer had said. And that unspoken demand, absolute, unsettling silence, was what terrified him most. He hardly noticed the weight of the cold mug in his hand, its porcelain rim pressing into his palm as though it, too, disputed his presence in this silent kitchen. The night beyond the window was impermeable darkness. No wind stirred the olive boughs outside. No distant siren pierced the thick hush. Even the refrigerator's low hum seemed amplified, a ceaseless mechanical breath that underscored his own ragged inhalations. Michael stood barefoot on the worn tile, every nerve ending alert, as though the flash of fluorescent light from the next room would herald something irrevocable. He had taken 3 sips of iced tea over the last hour and abandoned them all. The liquid lay abandoned and tepid, a mute testament to his hesitation. He raised the mug again, as if the very motion might will him into action. Yet every instinct urged him to stay, and let the moment slip away into the obscurity of regret. A phone call, quick, professional, cancellation. No trip down the long, dark highway to Encino. No sit-down with a stranger whose name he would never utter publicly. $5 million hung in limbo, a transaction that promised nothing but more questions. A bracing chord on a nearby piano pulled him from his reverie. He turned towards the slightly ajar door leading to the studio, a sanctuary he had forsaken for these recent sleepless nights. The echo of his own footsteps carried more weight than any spotlight. Each soft tap against polished hardwood resonated with the ghosts of old rehearsals, of melodies once simple and pure, now stained by uncertainty. He opened the door and found himself surrounded by instruments bathed in bluish lamplight. A grand piano with its lid propped open like a silent confidant, a tangle of microphone cables curled at its feet, and against the far wall, a collection of guitars leaning as though weary from their own histories. He crossed the room in 3 strides, the soles of his feet brushing against the cool planks. His eyes were drawn to the mixing console, a constellation of knobs and faders that he used to navigate his creative universe. Tonight, it lay dormant, untouched. Michael pressed a finger to the play button on the control surface. The speakers came alive with the faint hum of silence, an ironic prelude to the storm within him. He raised the mug once more, reluctant to let it go, as though its contents could anchor him to the moment, to a decision. But it felt emptier now than ever. Just another gesture of a man teetering on the edge of a choice he was desperate to unmake. Then the message arrived. His phone lay face down on a nearby stool, but its sudden vibration was impossible to ignore. He stared at it as though it had betrayed him, then crossed the width of the room and lifted it, reading 3 words that he didn't immediately comprehend. Payment confirmed. Details follow. He flipped the device over, thumb swiping the notification away. A single email from his attorney glared at him, its subject line stark and unadorned. Private engagement. He exhaled, fingers trembling as he tapped it open. The body of the message held only a handful of lines. An unknown party has remitted $5 million for a private meeting. Venue: a residential property, suburban Chicago. Conditions: no photographers, no press, no recording. This is not for the public. This is personal. I offer, not request, my gratitude. One sentence stood out, lodged like a splinter in his mind. I offer, not request, my gratitude. Gratitude, yet the gesture felt anything but gracious to him. He reread the words, searching for a hidden syllable, an asterisk explaining the price tag. Nothing, just an ominous silence. He set the phone down, each breath painting a thin fog in the cool air. His reflection in the darkened console monitors looked unfamiliar. Pale eyes ringed with exhaustion, cheeks hollowed by nights spent chasing chords that no longer resonated. The weight of the message settled over him like an unspoken threat. Who had orchestrated this? Was it an elaborate prank by a dangerous admirer? Or an act of devotion so absolute it demanded his presence? Michael's mind drifted back to the dreams that had stalked him these past weeks. Hallways bathed in stark hospital light, infants wailing somewhere just beyond reach, a woman's voice drowning beneath the whir of medical equipment. He remembered the sensation of sliding across cold linoleum, the taste of antiseptic on his tongue, and above all, that inexplicable ache of recognition, something he had no memory of living, yet felt in his bones. He had tried to dismiss them as stress-induced illusions, the byproduct of a relentless schedule that refused to yield. But after the email, those phantoms seemed urgent, more insistent than before. He closed his eyes and saw them again. The tiny cradle swaying under an indifferent ceiling, a nurse's white coat rustling, a hand reaching out through layers of sterile air. A single thought held him immobile. Whatever awaited him in Chicago had roots deeper than any fan's longing. It clawed at the corners of his psyche and refused to loosen its grip. He glanced around the studio once more, as though seeking counsel from the instruments themselves. The guitar necks caught the light and offered no answers. The piano's keys lay silent, heavy with expectation. Even the shadows seemed to coil, anticipating the moment he would make his choice. In that charged atmosphere, Michael felt every heartbeat thunder like a drum. He raised the mug, its chipped handle trembling between his fingers, and brought it to his lips for one final mouthful, but found nothing but a bitter echo of his own apprehension. The ice had melted long ago. He set the mug down with deliberate care, wiped his palm on his jeans, and flicked off the studio light. Darkness swallowed him, but this time it felt different, less oppressive, more like a threshold. He crossed back through the door into the kitchen, pausing only to straighten the mug on the counter. As he slid on his shoes, the last of the cold tea pooled at the bottom, a silent witness to his resolve. The engine of his car would roar to life soon, carrying him toward an unknown rendezvous that he had almost declined. In the moments before he would exit his house in Encino, a place of comfort and routine, Michael wondered if he had made a terrible mistake by agreeing to step into the silence. But a deeper part of him, one that had lain dormant amid accolades and applause, stirred with a curious determination. Some voices from the past demanded to be heard, and he was about to listen. Michael's rental car slid to a silent stop beneath a low-hanging elm in the quiet cul-de-sac. He cut the engine and sat for a breath longer, drawing in the scent of damp earth and freshly mown grass. The street lamps cast pale halos on the pavement, muted sentinels watching as he stepped out, his shoes crunching on gravel. He tugged his collar up against the cool late-spring air and carried only a small leather satchel. No entourage, no flashing cameras, just him, as the conditions had demanded. The house was modest, a two-story clapboard with peeling white paint and an aged brick chimney. The facade's symmetry belied its history, but Michael sensed an undercurrent of quiet endurance, as though the walls themselves had witnessed stories that refused to die. He advanced on the chipped front steps, his heart beating a steady rhythm of anticipation and unease. A single porch light glowed through stained glass, sending fractured colors dancing across the threshold. He paused at the door. No security guard, no assistant to usher him in. Just a brass door knocker shaped like a lily. Michael lifted it and rapped twice. The sound was firm, deliberate. He waited. After a moment so still it could have been eternity, the door swung open. She stood there. An elderly woman in a loosely tailored blouse and wool skirt, her hair the color of ashen moonlight, pulled back into a neat bun. Her eyes, pale and unflinching, met his with an intensity that stole the air from his lungs. They were the eyes of someone unaccustomed to frivolity, someone who measured each word before she spoke it. "Mr. Turner?" she asked, voice soft yet unwavering. He inclined his head. "Michael Turner." She nodded once and stepped aside. "Welcome, please." No invitation to shake hands, no attempt at small talk. She led him through the narrow foyer into a living room dimly lit by a single lamp in the corner. The walls were lined with bookcases sagging under the weight of leather-bound volumes and yellowing photo albums. A tall grandfather clock ticked somewhere behind a velvet curtain, its pendulum swinging like a heartbeat in the hush. Michael sank into an overstuffed armchair opposite her. He crossed one ankle over the other, hands resting on the satchel at his side. The silence stretched between them, taut and expectant, like a bowstring drawn to its limit. He cleared his throat. "Thank you for seeing me." She didn't smile. Instead, she gestured to the satchel. "You brought something." He opened it, a thin folder containing letters and photographs. His own archive of newspaper articles, award certificates, album covers. He felt foolish, like a boy presenting his homework for approval. "I thought, maybe—" She raised a hand. "No explanation necessary." Her eyes flicked to the mug of tea on the side table. It was untouched, the surface still smooth, betraying no sign of use. "I know why you're here." Her certainty hit him like a discreet blow to the chest. He exhaled, remembering the stranger's words, "I offer, not request, my gratitude." Gratitude for something he could not recall having done. "You know everything?" "You know only part of it," she replied, folding her hands in her lap. Her voice softened, carrying a hint of sorrow that sharpened the room's atmosphere. "My name is Grace Farrow. My husband was Dr. Elliot Farrow." Michael's breath caught. "The obstetrician." Her gaze flickered toward a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, an aged image of a hospital corridor, its lights humming overhead. In the center, a man in scrubs stood beside a bassinet, cradling a tiny infant. The date scrawled beneath read August 12, 1958. It was the very image he had glimpsed in the attorney's email. "He saved her," she said quietly, as though revealing a secret she had carried for decades. "Your mother." The weight of her words settled around him. His mother, he had grown up hearing that her birth had been complicated, that she nearly didn't survive. But the name of the doctor, the details of that night, had always been shrouded in medical records he never accessed. Yet here, in this suburban living room, a thread connected him to a stranger's life and death. "She told me once," he managed, voice tight. "She said she was just a lucky baby." Grace nodded. "She was, but she wasn't the only one saved that night." She reached into her purse and withdrew a bundle of yellowed letters tied with a ribbon. He wrote these for years, to the families of every child he rescued. Michael leaned forward, blinking away the impulse to stand. Grace set the letters on the coffee table between them. The ink had faded, but each page bore the meticulous handwriting of a man who carried burdens heavier than most would understand. He never sought recognition, she continued. He said his reward was watching lives flourish. He lifted one envelope. The return address read, Dr. E. Farrow, Chicago Children's Hospital. He slid a finger along the edge of the first page. The letter began, To the parents of little Anna. He frowned. Anna wasn't his name. He flipped the stack, skimming names. Sarah, David, Michael. There it was, to the Turner family. The date was June 14th, 1965, 7 years after his birth. Grace observed him closely. He wanted to give back. He believed in the ripple of kindness. Her voice thickened with emotion. But he saved more than bodies. He saved hope, including a child you sponsored many years later. She paused. You funded the Willow Creek Orphanage. He swallowed. 10 years ago, on a whim, he donated to a small Midwestern shelter. He had never known the source of its bequests. They called it a matching grant from a Dr. G. Dot. She nodded again. Because of him. A silence fell, sacred and heavy. Michael closed the folder, his mind racing with the incompleteness of a life lived in spotlight and applause, unaware of the invisible bonds that had shaped his own story. He looked at Grace, at the quiet dignity etched in her lined face, and felt the fragile division between fame and humanity shatter. Grace rose, her joints creaking like an old piano key. She moved to a sideboard and returned with a single-framed photograph. Elliot Farrow at sunset, standing in a field of tall grass, his kind eyes fixed on the horizon. He wanted you to know, she said, offering it to Michael, not as a superstar, but as a son he never had. Michael took the frame. The glass was cool beneath his fingertips. He glanced back at her, searching for something. Gratitude, grief, forgiveness. She turned away, leaning on the mantel, as though the weight of years pressed against her. For the first time he dared to speak the question at the edge of his thoughts. Why now? Grace closed her eyes, a single tear escaping down her cheek. Because silence has its price, and I can no longer hear my own heart over its echo. The grandfather clock chimed somewhere in the house, marking the hour with solemn dignity. In that moment, Michael understood that he had been summoned not for a photo op or a public gesture, but to listen, to honor a promise made in shadow, years before he sang his first note. And as Grace retreated into the corridor, leaving him alone with faded letters and a legacy he never expected, Michael felt the weight of a new purpose settle within him, like the first light of dawn. He held the sheaf of yellowed letters gingerly, as though each page might crumble beneath his fingertips, revealing secrets that time itself had tried to bury. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the lace curtains, catching motes of dust that swirled like memories suspended in air. Grace sat quietly in her armchair, the embroidery on its back worn smooth by decades of use, her eyes fixed on the small pile between them. Michael felt its weight shift from mere paper to something far heavier, an inheritance of compassion he had never known existed. He turned to the first letter, dated September 3rd, 1958. The ink was faded to a sepia tone, but the handwriting remained precise, the letters looping elegantly like a gentle melody. My dear Mr. and Mrs. Collins, it began, I write to thank you for the privilege of assisting in the birth of your daughter Anna, a spirited little one whose laugh I can still hear ringing in the corridors. He paused, his throat tight. The letter went on to describe a harrowing moment when the baby's heart slowed, a nurse's quick intervention, and the soft click of the resuscitator. There was a humility in every line, a refusal to claim heroism. Elliot Farrow signed it simply, "Your devoted physician." Michael looked up. "He wrote these for all of them," he said softly. Grace nodded. He believed families needed closure beyond the sterile reports. He wanted them to feel that the child entering the world was a shared triumph, not just a medical miracle. Her voice was calm but firm, each word chosen with care. He flipped to the next letter, December 21st, 1959, addressed to the Martinez family. It described a frantic night when the power had gone out, forcing the staff to perform by flashlight. The note conveyed exhaustion, relief, and a wish that the family hold tight to their newborn's warmth. Michael's pulse quickened. Within these pages lay the unvarnished truth of Dr. Farrow's devotion. Countless hours beyond the operating tables, endless acts of kindness unmarked by public praise. Something shifted inside him. He realized that the orchard of his own generosity had been planted by another's unseen hand. His music, his fame, the philanthropic gestures he made on a whim, they were echoes of a legacy he had never consciously traced. A fragile kinship bound him to a man he'd never met, but whose spirit lived on in every life saved and every smile kindled. Grace rose and moved toward a small sideboard where an open wooden box waited. Inside lay a faded diary, its leather cover cracked and soft. "I kept this hidden," she said, lifting it out. "He wrote here every night after his shift. I thought it too personal, until I realized you needed the rest of the story." Michael opened the diary, fingertips brushing over a page dated August 12, 1958, the night his mother was born. The entry read, "The delivery was complicated by an electrical failure. Mother and child teetered on the brink. At one point, I feared neither would survive. But the child, she fought with a resilience that reminded me why I chose this path. May she live to bring light to this world." He swallowed. The words were raw, unfiltered. For the first time, he envisioned the scene. The flickering lights, the breath-catching seconds, the triumphant first cry slicing through panic. He turned pages, finding entries about donations sent anonymously to pediatric wards, to institutions for children with disabilities, to refugee families in need. Each note bore the same modest signature, E.F. Grace explained that her husband had designated a portion of his savings to be distributed in secret, wanting no recognition. He believed genuine charity was anonymous, and that the act itself should be its own reward. Michael closed the diary and felt a tremor pass through him. "All this time," he whispered, "I thought I created my own path, but I've been walking in his footsteps without knowing." Grace placed a hand over his. "Your mother never told you?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "It was always just stories about a good doctor. I never imagined this." She leaned back, eyes glistening. "He spoke of you often, in his letters. Not knowing your name, he prayed that whatever child he helped would grow to do great things. And here you are." A silence deepened around them, the kind woven from revelations that leave the soul unmoored. Michael looked at the photographs on the mantel, the one of Elliot Farrow in his crisp white coat, the one of a tiny newborn bundled in blue, the one of a smiling infant clutching its mother's finger. He realized with a bittersweet ache that he was the living coda to a story begun long before he found his voice on the stage. He stood and walked to the mantel, studying the pictures. In the photo of his mother as a newborn, he saw not only her delicate nose, her tiny fists, but also the steady hands of the man who had guided her into life. The arc of his legacy curved through time, linking Grace's kitchen to concert halls, linking anonymous letters to sold-out arenas. When he turned back to Grace, his eyes were soft but resolute. "I need to honor him." His voice was steady, not with fanfare, but with the same quiet purpose. He thought of the orphanage he had supported years ago, unaware of its benefactor. He thought of the children whose futures he could still shape. Grace smiled, a small, tender movement. He would have understood. In that room, wreathed in sunlight and shadow, Michael felt the fragile line between past and present dissolve. The third chapter of his life had opened not with a performance, but with remembrance, and the knowledge that behind every note he sang, a greater symphony played on, a lifetime of unspoken gratitude, a melody of lives saved in silence. He closed the front door of that modest Chicago home with the softest click, a sound so gentle it might have been swallowed by the quiet of the street. The evening air pressed cool against his face as he stepped onto the porch, the single lantern above casting long shadows across the peeling paint of the clapboard siding. Each footfall away from the threshold felt like shedding a layer of certainty. What had been a simple meeting had become a reckoning, one he could neither anticipate nor escape. Behind him, Grace's silhouette stood at the window, framed by the warm glow of the living room lamp, watching him go without a word. He lingered for a heartbeat, absorbing the stillness that seemed to belong more to memory than to a late spring night. Every breath he drew tasted of secrets unearthed, of lives intertwined by a man neither of them had known until hours ago. Then he turned, slipping into his rental car without glancing back. The engine's hum was a soft exhale that carried him away from the house, down the narrow street, and into a solitude thick with reflection. For 7 days, Michael kept to himself. He returned to hotel rooms rather than the family home in Encino. He avoided rehearsals, let his phone ring unanswered, and spent afternoons wandering city parks, the expanse of grass and oak trees, doing little to calm the tempest within him. He reread the diary entries he'd borrowed, traced Dr. Farrow's cursive lines as one might follow a roadmap to the heart, yet each time he tried to write his own response, words of gratitude, of purpose, they felt hollow, insufficient to bridge the chasm between past and present. Then, on a blustery morning when clouds scudded across the sky like restless thoughts, he found himself once more parked beneath that elm. The house looked unchanged. The same cracked window sills, the same brazen tulips nodding in the front garden. Only he was different. He carried a slim journal bound in black leather, its pages blank but for a single entry written long ago. The door opened before he could raise his hand. Grace stood there, the lines of age etched deeper on her face, yet her posture resolute. She wore a simple cardigan, the color of dove's feathers, and her eyes held something like anticipation. Without a word, she guided him inside. He placed the journal on the coffee table between 2 cups of warm tea. Steam curled upward, faintly scented with chamomile. She regarded the book as though it were a relic. Maybe it was. Michael cleared his throat, heart pounding in the hush. He opened the cover to the page dated June 5th, 1979. The lines were cramped, youthful. "If I ever become more than the boy they handed me to, I will carry the kindness shown in silence. Whoever you are, whoever you've been, your hands have shaped my destiny. One day, I will repay a debt I cannot see." His voice trembled as he read the words aloud. Each syllable fell into the quiet room, heavier than applause, more vulnerable than any lyric he had ever performed. When he finished, he closed the journal and pushed it toward her. Grace lifted the book, fingers tracing the embossed title, "A Promise to the Unseen." Her eyes glistened, and at last she spoke. "You have." He exhaled, shoulders slumping. I didn't realize, until now, how much of me was his gift. His voice caught on the last word, as though naming the debt made it real. She rose and moved to a low cabinet. From its depths, she extracted an old turntable and a single vinyl record in a worn sleeve. The label read simply, E. Farrow's Blues Collection. No flashy graphics, just elegant type and the faint stain of fingerprints. She set the record on the platter and placed the needle at the edge. Michael seated himself on the hardwood floor, cross-legged, the teacup momentarily forgotten. As the soft crackle of vinyl gave way to the mournful wail of a harmonica, he closed his eyes. In that first breath of sound lay a lifetime. Late-night vigils in hospital corridors, whispered prayers in empty wards, the quiet triumph of each newborn cry. The music unfolded like a confession, raw and aching, each note a testament to hours spent listening to the faintest heartbeats. He listened without interruption, the world beyond the living room dissolving into the distant past. Grace sat in her armchair, her gaze directed toward the record player, her lips curved in a subtle, knowing smile. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Their shared silence spoke volumes of connection, of gratitude transmitted through air and memory. When the final notes faded and only the gentle hum of the turntable remained, Michael rose, reverence in every movement. He lifted the record and held it against his chest. Grace watched him, tears glinting in her eyes. A week later, long after he had returned to California, Michael arranged for funds to revive the old maternity ward at Chicago Children's Hospital. The project was carried out quietly, without press releases or fanfare. He instructed that the plaque in the new wing read simply, "In honor of Grace Farrow, whose silent gratitude launched a lifetime of kindness." Grace did not live to see the inaugural ceremony, but when the plaque was unveiled by hospital staff and grateful families, her name gleamed in brass letters beneath a soft spotlight. Eternal affirmation that the beginning of every story often lies in the unspoken devotion of another. And Michael, far from the roar of audiences, watched the photographs of the renovated ward on his manager's desk. His heart swelled not with pride as a performer, but with the quiet joy of a man who, at last, understood the full melody of his own life.